Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? Well, I know I made a video very recently about my preferences in gaming. I know I made several of them, but I know I made one, quite recently about some stuff. I think it was like "Ask not what your game can do for you." But I didn't make videos for a few days lately because I've been exercising and shoveling snow, and I am just wiped out. But I was talking to Runeslinger, and he was talking about this game Circle of Hands, and I'm not sure if I saw him say this in a video or whether it was to me directly, but he talked about the idea by this game by Ron Edwards that when he read it, it was as if the game had been written directly or especially for him, and he was like, "Wow, that's really cool." And so I said, "Gosh, I wonder what a game that was written especially for me, what it would look like." And so he said, "Well, would it be like 36 pages and have Errol Otis art?" And I was like, "Okay, touche, you got me." But I thought about it a little bit more because it's there's more than just what I've talked about. What would it really look like? Uh, and not surprisingly, as I took a look at all this, there's several different domains or categories or what other word did I put down here? You know, um, just divisions I would put down in terms of like what would make this game up. And on each one of those areas in the game, there's a spectrum, not surprisingly. And so you got several spectra I've got to look at here, and some of them, where in other words, there's two poles, there's two extremes, and where do I lie? Where's my preference lie? Usually somewhere in the middle, or is it closer to one end or another? Even more confusing is sometimes it's not a spectrum at all. It's like a kaleidoscope, where there's three or four poles or extremes, and where do I lie in terms of preference among all those? And those could be things like the old game as simulationist, narrativist type ideas, or even Runeslinger's intentions, where you've got like story first, setting first, character first, and even something like player first intention. Where do my preferences lie in terms of that? So it got interesting. So I made some notes, and maybe you're interested in me, and maybe you're not. But it is my channel, and it's about me, so I'm going to talk about this kind of stuff. And just for me, it was an examination of what really would be the game that would be best for me. What floats my boat? And one thing for me I noticed is that it's hard to describe. Like I know what it is when I see it, and I certainly know when it's not going my way. But in order sometimes to convey it, it's a little tough when I find that spot in the spectrum. So I'll go like point by point, and hopefully it's not too boring. But not surprisingly, to start off with, I like a core system that's adaptable across settings. It's modular, it's robust, it's hard to break. Um, Something that has meaningful attributes and abilities. But just something that's it's simple, it's easy to understand, it's robust, it's hard to mess it up. Nothing that's too involved when it comes right down to it. Uh, there's a sweet spot in terms of granularity. When it comes to that and many other parts of a mechanical part of the game. I like a lot of fiddly bits in theory, but in practice, it just kind of gets to a point where I'm no longer interested. It's no longer fun for me, And I talked many times about like waiting for the next issue of Dragon magazine as a kid, and oh, this rule is great, that rule is great. This makes a lot of sense. If we do this, that, and the other thing, it'll add so much more realism to the game. And eventually, it's like, man, dude, this is way too big. Not interested. So there's a sweet spot. I like a probably smallish, medium, not too small list of options. Not overly massive. And some of the options in the system I like just for flavor, where they you don't get penalized for having them. Some are meaningful, but I don't like the options or whatever you use in the game to turn the game into some kind of math dilemma, or mathematical exercise all the time. I don't like a game that has like sometimes when you don't like it, it's the wrong thing. When you've got options that they're must-have and other options that are just completely useless. I like a list where they're all meaningful. Whatever the options are, skills, abilities, classes, whatever, however the game is parsed up doesn't really matter to me. Just that the options are all valid. Um, don't like quick fix mechanical solutions in games. And the one I always think of is the damage versus large creatures. They assign to certain weapons in advanced Dungeons and Dragons. So you use something like a two-handed sword, you do this massive amount of damage versus large creatures. So if you're a fighter, you want to have one of those. You don't want to use a spear. What if I want to use a spear for flavor? And it was a quick fix to kind of boost the fighter's power. I don't dig stuff like that. I don't want that breaks it for me. Breaks the verisimilitude. Not a big fan of that sort of thing. So flavor cool, quick fix options not so much. All right, not surprisingly, once again, and it's going to start to get interesting if you watch my videos, or maybe you'll be surprised, maybe you won't. I like fast narrative combat. I like fast narrative resolution for everything, for spell, for magic, for any kind of you scientific junk. Let's see, skill resolution, task resolution, conflict resolution, just fast and narrative. Like, let's get to the point. Let's roll the dice and see what happens. Um, I like, this is where it kind of gets interesting. I like narrative description of intentions and actions. Um, but, I want the rules and mechanics and outcomes, they're not to be so specific. And what I mean by that is, when this happens, this is exactly what happens. I don't like that spelled out as much. So, another way to put that is like, the rules, the mechanics, the dice rolls, they determine success, they determine failure, they maybe determine degree of success or failure. Maybe they determine things like complications or benefits. There are all kinds of different, things that these mechanics can do. But what that actually looks like at the end of the day, maybe they give you a framework, but what that really looks like is up to the narration of the game master and the players. Who gets more narration and what part, that's up to the game. That doesn't bug me too much, but the idea that, those mechanics give us this, like, okay, success, fail, what does that look like? That's up to us. I like the creativity. I do like a powerful sense of randomness. Dice definitely rule. When it comes right, if you roll a dice, you're going to live by and die by the dice. Sometimes not so metaphorically. But I like this kind of sweet spot between, like, game master ruling, narrative, maybe a cinematic control over what things look like, and the outcomes being determined by the mechanics and the dice. There's a sweet spot in there, and I lean a little bit more towards this kind of like narrative control, maybe that makes me more narrativist. I don't know, probably not, because I definitely live and die by the dice rolls. The other thing is, I kind of like this. There's a sweet spot somewhere, and it's hard for me to describe where the heck this is, between like some kind of creative, maybe cinematic action. Things are cool. And on the other end of the spectrum, just this kind of logical consistency in the world. Like, the world has real laws of physics and everything. It's a real, honest to goodness, logical place where we're doing all this stuff in. So somewhere on that spectrum, it depends on the game, I suppose, or depends on maybe the genre, which I like better. If it's grittier, then definitely I like it more, towards the realistic side. And if it's more pulpy, maybe I like it a little bit more cinematic. And sprinkled in there somewhere is just the right amount of mathematical and tactical goodies, just enough, but not a ton. I don't want, like I said, I don't want the mathematical exercise. So there's definitely some games out there that were not written for me. I don't necessarily want a mechanical obligation to role play, and if there is an incentive to role play, it's got to be really well written. Somehow Ubiquity Style Points kind of did it right. It's not so obtrusive, but there's other ways where I just don't like the way they're written. So I feel like they take away my agency. Same old G would love that. I like a game system. Now we're talking about more like character creation itself. I like a game that allows for some interesting flawed characters. Not necessarily that there's an obligation to be flawed. Maybe incentive to be flawed. Maybe depends on the game. But not a huge giant incentive like you must be flawed. And by the same token, I don't want having a flawed character to like instantly break them. Like, I want to be able to play a guy, a person, whoever I decide they are, without really saying, okay, well, this is useless because your guy has this major flaw. And I'm not talking about having no legs. I mean, just a flaw. And while we're at the character, what kind of characters? I like a game that supports having competent characters. That's one thing. I looked a little bit at Circle of Hands, and these characters are competent. I dig that. There's little differences between the characters, but they're all competent at what they're supposed to be doing. I like that. And I talked about like something like the old the OSR games I talk about frequently, where it's kind of the assumption is you're competent adventurers, like you have this broad skill base, and then you have these niche things that's your class in a game that supports that. Class is not a requirement for me in a game. It really isn't. But on this subject too, we'll talk about levels just for a second, because I've talked about level-based games, obviously, quite a bit. I've often said that, I don't like starting characters in a level-based game at things like a higher level, like third or fourth level, because it always feels like cheating to me. But that's not to say that, like, levels aren't necessarily important to me when it comes right down to it, and like what would be the game that would be written for me specifically. I don't care how you improve, but I like the characters to start out as somewhat competent. So yeah, maybe a game just starts the characters at a higher level of competence than first level in Dungeons and Dragons. Doesn't really bug me. I just don't like that cheating aspect. For some reason that bugs me. Um, but yeah, so you're competent. You're not superheroes. I don't want superhero characters either. But I want wherever the players, player characters actually exist. Okay, they're cut above the average person because they're not doing average things for the most part in adventures, or whatever the game is. And if we're playing a game where we are average people, I'm not interested. A little above average, but not superhuman either. You know, just a little above average, competent at what we're supposed to be doing. Um, and any kind of differences between us, there's some flavor stuff. They're all meaningful, but and it doesn't, like I said, it doesn't have to be class based either. All right, as far as character relationships go, I like them formed more in-game play than in like the planning stage. Like I don't mind a session zero. We're definitely having a session zero, and then the game I'm going to be playing in now. But I prefer the relationships to kind of come out through actual gameplay. In terms of like setting, world, what's this game really about? What are you going to be doing in this game? A great premise is awesome, and there ought to be something really cool about it. To me, it's not important what the heck that is. If it grabs me, it grabs me. If the premise doesn't grab me, it doesn't. Okay, I can't tell you. That's a real like what flavor ice cream should you eat. And there's a lot of flavors I like, a lot of premises I like. But for the majority, like a vanilla world, a vanilla campaign, well-used tropes, those are all cool. What I mean is like I like a setting that's pretty much mundane as it could be, whether it's the real world with a twist, or what you would imagine the world would be like. I don't want to say fantasy world, but you know what I mean, like medieval or something. But with a twist, like what makes it weird. So the mundane world, except for that one thing, or group of things that are related, that make it special, weird, different. Like why would you want to play a game about this? That does it for me, as opposed to like just mundane world, or super psycho fantasy land, Alice in Wonderland, Xanth, not so much. But in terms of like what really makes the game special, I don't know if this is a game design thing, or I suppose if a game says this is how you're supposed to play it, or this would be the optimal way to play it, or whether it's just a play style preference set. Okay, but here we go. Let me tell you what it is. I like it when we make the campaign. And I mean the game master and the players, but especially the players. I like to start out with this blank slate for most things. And I talked about like relationships between players, but like blank slate as far as just about almost everything. You got this campaign world, whatever it is. But for the most part, the magic happens when you press record. And what I mean by like press record, and it's kind of like a recording studio. You get the band recording studio. Okay, press record and see what happens. And Runeslinger's going to hate this analogy, but it's like a Grateful Dead concert almost. As opposed to a symphony. Symphony is perfect. Everything's written out. You practice it, you do it right. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. That's not what I want. I want that thing where you go to a Grateful Dead concert, back in the day, and you press record because you got to tape them, and sometimes it'd be terrible, it'd be a mess. But every once in a while, this magic would happen you could not recreate, and I like that. And if you don't like Grateful Dead, okay, jazz. How about Miles Davis? Whatever group you want in there, or artist you want in there. You get all these players together, you press record, the magic happens because they do it. They're aggressive. So, I like the characters to be aggressive actors in the world. Constantly planning, plotting, scheming. They've got goals they're pursuing, whatever it is that they're interested in. I prefer my preferred style of game to game, be a game master of and be a player in is a game where we're constantly in like some kind of trouble or peril. Like there's always some kind of tension or drama. And maybe narrativist, who knows? But no, not really. It's like because I want this tension and drama to be created by this aggressive gameplay on the part of the characters, on the part of the players. That's what I like. So that covers over a multitude of sins, but and so I suppose if a game really enforces or suggests that style of play, or like allows for that style of play, I am really into that. That's a game that's written for me. I walk in any session where it's like that. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm in the right place. Unless I start getting bogged down by all kinds of minutia, I'm like, okay, maybe it's the wrong place. As far as intentions, I figured I'd talk about Runeslinger's intentions a little bit. And I'll link the video where he talks about that. But I'm not a big character first intention guy when it comes to my I guess gameplay or a game that supports that sort of thing. Character development is something that like yeah, I'll explore my character, but that's going to happen. I like a game where that happens as a result of everything else. It's my option whether or not to explore my character, but it'll probably happen. Um, I don't know if it's surprising, but I like a lot of story first intention. Maybe it's really genre first intention. And what I mean by that is like, we sat down, we had this kind of, we didn't sit down, we typed over the internet. But we're talking about, playing, All for One Regime Diabolique, right? And so, uh, one of the guys said, okay, what are we going to do in terms of like, okay, here's these five things that we could focus on. It was something like, combat and action, horror, intrigue, romance, military, and here's 100 points. Assign like how many you want to each one. Like, what do you want this game to be more about? So we kind of were choosing like kind of I guess in a way the story or the genre, not scripting what the story would be like, but like what kind of game do you want to play in? And I prefer that sort of thing a lot. However, I'm a big setting first guy as well, where we're going to play in this game world, whatever this world is, this vanilla world with the one twist, and we're going to act as if that world is real, as if our characters, our competent characters, were real. What would I do in this situation? What would my character do in this situation? I am Corbin Dallas. I did play a character named Corbin Dallas once. And I also like a little sprinkling of player first intention in there as well. The idea that you're there to just hang out, play, have a good time. I like a little bit of human element in there quite a bit. So, and as far as like you talked recently, I think he actually Runesinger talked, maybe it wasn't recently, in his videos on A Circle of Hands about lines and veils. And the idea of the line is like something that you shall not cross. We're not going to talk about this or have this in the game. And a veil is something where it's going to be in the game, but we're not going to describe it. There's a veil over it. This is my own personal thing. It has nothing to do with game design whatsoever. But for me, I don't have a heck of a lot of lines or veils. Pretty much everything is on the table for exploration. I understand a lot of people aren't like that, so I respect that. But I prefer to be able to examine all kinds of things. Not because I'm a sicko, but just because for me, it's fun. Like, what can we explore in this? It's a little bit like one of the reasons I liked science fiction so much as a literature genre is like you could explore anything in it because you had the ability to do the absurd with a book. Nothing was off the table in terms of what if this happened, what if that happened. I'm digressing into literature now, or anyhow. But yeah, so those are my long video. Sorry, but I was thinking to myself like, what would be the ideal? What would it look like? I don't know if I come to a real big conclusion. I know what it would not look like. I know what elements that I really do like. What about you? At the end, if you've stuck around at the end of this really long video, what do you like in a game? What would the ideal game that was written for you? What would it look like? What elements would it have? What elements would it not have? Where do you lie in the spectrum of all those different domains or aspects of the game? What are your preferences? Is it really nailed down? Do you have a sweet spot? Are your tolerances big or small? Have you thought about this? Do you care? Have a good one.